This interview is brought to you by Nutanix. Nutanix makes extending to the public cloud simpler, faster, and more cost-effective by eliminating complicated application dependency mapping and refactoring. See how at nutanix.com/govcio.
Hi, we're at AWS Summit. I'm sitting here with Young Bang, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology at the Army. Another word for busy. So tell me, Army is going through a lot of exciting change right now. There's a lot of technology programs and efforts happening. What are some of your biggest priorities over the coming year?
Amy, thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. If you've been tracking the Army, we've been doing a lot of modernization from the Army. And if you look at things, it's the largest modernization we've done in the past 40 years. And what I say these days is all the modernization with our exquisite weapons platforms is really underpinned by digital transformation. And having been an industry guy and being tech heavy, digital transformation is really kind of table stakes for us. And if you look at historically, the Army and the DoD really never been kind of cutting edge on adoption of technology, let alone processes. And so we've been doing a lot of things to really break down some of the obstacles in the Army as well as DoD that creates a lot of friction unintentionally for us to adopt modern technologies, right? And some of it is really software development. And, you know, the industry's adopted modern software development practices and been going through Agile and CI/CD for, decades. And the Army and DoD hasn't been quick to adopt that. And so one of the big things that the Army has been doing is something called the software directive that the Secretary signed out during the South by Southwest. And that directive is really driven by our acquisition community so we can actually catch up to what industry is doing, but more importantly, help us adopt and meet industry in the middle, right? So there have been unintentional blockers from an acquisition process or authorities or, rigor that prevented us to get to agile development, let alone get to CI/CD. And so what we've done in the software directives codify a lot of those things and processes and policies to let us accelerate software development and then to meet industry in where they are so we could get to CI/CD. And so some of those things, it's not really earth-shattering for industry, but for us, we've really streamlined the way that we do requirements. So gone are the days of 1,000-page documents that are requirements that build these huge, exquisite weapon systems. We've actually adopted something called the CNS, which essentially is a 5-page document that says, hey, we need to get this requirement or capability done, and allows us really to accelerate software. And then other things that we're doing, when you're doing DevSecOps, right, we're doing the testing with the development and all that. Unintentionally, we've had a very serial process from a testing as well as a cyber perspective and an ATO perspective. And so we've collapsed that into the process to accelerate things. So again, for us, it's super exciting. For industry, it's kind of like, no duh, but really it's our ways to really kind of meet you in the middle so we can actually get some of those done. A couple of the other things that we've really driven is the notion of data, right? So these days, everyone's all talking about AI, but we all know that you have to get the data correct so we could get AI at scale and at speed. And so we've been really pushing something called the data mesh, right? So Zagat is kind of the inventor of that, but we've adopted that into the Army. And for us, it's a little bit much more complex because we have a tactical as well as an enterprise approach on that. And implementations tend to really focus on enterprise. On the Army, because we tend to be disconnected, we have to have a little bit of a different implementation. And so we've codified that in what we call the UDRA, which is the Unified Data Reference Architecture, which essentially is how do you get data mesh? And we created a reference architecture that you can actually, if you're a vendor or industry, you can go to ixl.army.mil, request access, and we've actually done a reference implementation so you can actually plug in and show us your wares, work with us to define data products, to really show us your capabilities around the data mesh. That is critical for us so we can actually get a couple things in place. So now that we are actually adopting modern software development practices, we're trying to make sense of the data. Those are all, again, precursors for why we're here, AI, right, and Gen AI at the AWS conference.
Absolutely. A lot of fascinating looks into how technology is really also leading to improved partnerships and how that also streamlines the mission. So how do you see acquisition modernization playing a part in how the Army is developing and fielding some of this new tech with these new processes?
Yeah, I mean, so I always tell the story of when I used to be in the Army. I was the recipient of the big 5 weapons platforms back in the 80s, right? So the big Abrams tanks, the Bradleys, those literally took a decade to develop and build, and then another decade to fill. And so when you think about 2 decades to get a new capability in the Army is what typically we have, because we have to have exquisite weapon systems. These days, we've really accelerated the acquisition process. So a lot of people are like, oh, acquisition, it's a long process. It is a long process, but we really shortened the process. And from the time that we get a requirement, we've done things where we've worked with industry and done quick proof of pilots and pilots and actually fielded capabilities 2 years after we've gotten a requirement. So gone are the days of 20 years to actually get capabilities in the hand of soldiers. We've done things in 2 years to get our capabilities to our soldiers. And a lot of that was done because Congress has actually afforded us a lot of authorities. And the Army has been super aggressive about using those authorities, experimenting, taking lessons learned, and kind of using hybrids of those authorities to get at the acquisition at speed that we're talking about. And so some of those things are something like the mid-tier acquisition process. And that literally is really geared, in my mind, to working with industry as a teamwork concept and saying, hey, industry, we think we need something like this. What do you have? And let's pilot it and prototype something super fast. And that's how we got capabilities out there, whether it's weapon systems, whether it's the next-gen squad weapon or software capabilities a lot faster. And then that way we are able to get that out. And these days, with a lot of things that are happening across the world, we've gotten other authorities and a lot of other things. Like, it's interesting, acquisitions were really constrained sometimes by the budget process. And we are directly given budget from Congress. And that's a good thing because it requires discipline. We're really beholden to the taxpayer. But it also requires us to go back every single time for a change from Congress. And it's hard for us to give multi-year contracts above $1 threshold. And because some of these new authorities that Congress has given us, we're able to do multi-year procurements, right? So we could work with vendors for a long term or have a better process to work through. And so again, a lot of authorities that Congress has given us, we've been pretty aggressive about using multiple authorities to get at the acquisition of speed that we're talking about.
Absolutely. It's definitely a win-win situation for both sides. Where do you see the most impacts from shifts in the cybersecurity landscape and some of these new focuses around emerging technologies?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I'm going to pull in this current scenario with Ukraine and Russia. And if you think about the technology, it's a great observation of what we can do with modern tech as well as traditional tech. And, you know, it's a hybrid of traditional warfare and modern warfare. And if you look at the things that, like, everyone's talking about drones these days, right? Drones are a component of that, but there's a lot of systems, right, and technology that enables all the drones beyond just, you know, the drones and the controllers. And so one of the things that we've seen is that Russia has a very large electronic signature on the battlefield. And so what we've done is we've worked with Ukraine to take advantage of that. And we've also incorporated those as the lessons observed. So we're trying to really reduce our own electronic footprint. And so while we have exquisite capabilities, think about Gen AI and GPUs, right? Takes up a lot of energy, takes a lot of cooling, creates a big footprint in the battlefield. And so we need to be much more mobile. We have to have a lower signature. And we have to really look at things differently these days. Electronic warfare and cyber attack becomes pretty commonplace in the battlefield now, whereas previously wasn't quite as commonplace. And so the notion of kinetic and non-kinetic effects are really important now. And so for us, cybersecurity is critical. Electronic warfare and jamming and actually offensive capabilities are critical. And again, those are areas that the Army has been really excelling in. We actually build a lot of cyber capabilities for cybercom, offensive and defensive. And we're actually really retooling our electronic warfare capabilities, offensive and defensive as well.
Awesome. It's definitely interesting to hear. I guess I never thought of Russia as its electronic footprint, but it makes a lot of sense. And the defensive and offensive needs there is, critical. So that's really interesting to hear. How is the Army looking to broader industry partnerships to fulfill its tech strategy?
Yeah, I think the Army has done a super job working with industry. And if industry hasn't had the opportunity to work with us, come. We want to hear from y'all. I think we're pretty open and transparent. And we have a lot of programs that we've been working to really encourage more of that partnership. So beyond some of the MTA where we work with industry and prototype things really quickly, we have other programs like small business innovation, CIBRs and STTRs and XTech programs where we really encourage a lot of industry to come and say, hey, pitch us some ideas. So we have prize competitions, right? Or we have the CIBRs that really say, hey, your technologies might not be at the TRL level 9 that we need, but we're going to work with you now to mature that to, from a TRL 2 to the 4 or whatever. And we have programs set in place to really encourage startups, non-traditionals, as well as regular industry companies that have worked with DoD. And we've had a program in there. And I know sometimes there's some frustrations on the length and duration of CIBRs and how long does it take. But, the Army has actually streamlined our process. So we could award CIBRs. The average CIBR last year for the Army took 23 days, right? So super fast when you talk about acquisition or procurement at speed. And so we've accelerated these things so we can encourage more participation from industry. So that's one thing. I think there's huge opportunities for traditionals and non-traditionals to work with us. The other part is that we are pretty active from a communication standpoint, right? So you have your traditional RFIs, but what we tend to do is not just RFIs for market research or RFI that kind of puts out a draft PWS. We'll do those things too. But we have RFIs because we say, hey, we're thinking about this, right? We might be thinking about satellite as a service or radio as a service, and we'll throw it out to industry and say, what do you really think about this? Give us your feedback, because we're not really definitive on that, and we really do want to hear industry feedback. Or we're thinking about X, or we're, even before we did the data mesh, we had a series of multiple RFIs, and we took the feedback and we actually evolved our model, right? And took in all the industry's comments and actually evolved it over time. And that's what really became the data mesh and the UDRA. And so we really encourage that. We have a series of TEMS, technical exchange meetings with industry. And those are those are everywhere, right? All of our PEOs do it. And I would encourage industry to really get involved. And so there's many touch points that I think the Army is proactively using to engage with industry. And of course, you could use the traditional, come and see us in the building. We'll always take those as well. But we really like to encourage the interactions with industry and discussion.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I think we got data mesh, cyber, Russia. We got everything in there, logistics and acquisition. So thank you so much for the insight.
No problem. Thank you very much, Amy.